Now this word, Proverbs 49:12, is found in 1 Kings chapter 9, verses 6 through 8. But if ye shall at all turn from following me, ye or your children will not keep my commandments and my statutes which I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then will I cut off Israel out of the land which I have given them, and this house which I have hallowed for my name will I cast out of my sight. And Israel shall be a proverb and a byword among all people. And at this house which is high, everyone that passeth by it shall be astonished, and shall hiss, and they shall say, Why hath Jehovah done thus unto this land and to this house? So did you see what God said there? He's talking to Israel, and he says if they do not follow him or keep his commandments, then he'll cut them off, and they will be or become a proverb. Israel will be a proverb or a parable if they're unfaithful and God cuts them off. And what do we say all the time as we're reading Jeremiah, we're reading Ezekiel? Well, God's judgment on Judah here, or God's judgment on Israel, is a type and a figure, a proverb of the church. It's a parable pointing to the New Testament church. And here God gives justification for that. He says it again in 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verses 20 and 21. And again, verse 19, God warns about turning from his statutes. Then verse 20, Then will I pluck them up by the roots out of the land which I have given them, and this house which I have sanctified for my name will I cast out of my sight, and will make it, now it's specifically the house of God, will make it to be a proverb and a byword among all nations. Judgment begins at the house of God, a proverb. Now, some people, they want to say, well, that doesn't have anything to do with the church. Well, God just said when he cuts off Israel for their unfaithfulness, he makes them a proverb and a byword, a type and a figure. And what would that type and figure point to? What would the proverb of a cut-off house or a cut-off nation of Israel point to? Well, look at Acts chapter 7, verse 38, where God in verse 36 is speaking of Israelites coming out of Egypt and the wilderness sojourn. Then in verse 38, this is he that was in the church in the wilderness, which the angel which spake to him in the Mount Sinai, and with our fathers who received the lively oracles to give unto us. It's referring to Israel in the wilderness, and God says is the church in the wilderness, because they are a proverb. They are a type and a figure. It's the same as in Psalm 78, verse 1. Give ear, O my people, to my law. That is, let him who has ears to hear, hear. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old. And then we read a bunch of Proverbs, or we read things like found in the book of Proverbs. If we go on to read Psalm 78, we read of the history of Israel coming out of Egypt, wandering in the wilderness, the opening of the Red Sea, the water out of the rock, various things like that. And yet God begins it by saying, now you better incline your ear. You better have ears to hear. And he's going to open his mouth in a proverb or a parable. It's the same word as in Proverbs 1 verse 1, and utter dark sayings of old. So we can see when God says that Israel is a proverb, it explains why in Matthew 24, let those which be in Judea, and God's talking about the end of the world when he's long since, for almost 2,000 years, cut them off. They're no longer his people. Israel is not in view in any way, the nation, but let those which be in Judea flee to the mountains, because they're made a proverb. And the application is to the church in the wilderness, the churches in congregation. So did you see what God said there in 1 Kings chapter 9, verses 6 through 8? He's talking to Israel, and he says if they do not follow him or keep his commandments, then he'll cut them off, and they will be or become a proverb. Israel, if they're unfaithful and God cuts them off, will be a proverb or a parable.